Hello and welcome to RCM Tech Talk. I'm John Williamson. I'm joined by Francis Burton. Today we're going to talk more about RCM outsourcing and accountability and how to work together and maintain that level of accountability while working with your revenue cycle partner. Depending on what components of your revenue cycle you've outsourced, this may be a very big set of accountability relationship, or maybe you've only outsourced a subset of your work, maybe aged AR or whatever. So, Francis, you've worked with a lot of practices, some of which have outsourced, some of which have brought stuff back in-house, all these different scenarios. Things aren't always going well. Talk about reporting as a starting point of what you see between the two parties.
Sure. I know that a lot of RCM companies provide standard reports each month across the board, regardless of the client. Custom reports are probably less prevalent unless it was established early on in your service agreement. But I find that the standard reports are a lot of times a regurgitation of what you can already produce yourself within the system. Like they go into your system and they select the same 3 every month to present to you. What I do not see happening with that is as a collaborative effort to say, what do these reports tell you about us, about your practice internally? Is there something we need to do differently? We need to do better? Or how can you help us? How can we help each other? That I do not see happening. But from a report only standpoint, it is a lot of times just very standardized, out of the box data. And it kind of turns into, what do you do with it? That varies from client to client.
Yeah. Well, and I've been on these calls where I'm kind of the broker, intermediary, consultant between the practice and the RCM company, both of which I'm trying to make be successful. But they're doing exactly that. They're basically just downloading EHR reports. Now, a lot of RCM companies maintain a separate spreadsheet, because we all live in a land of spreadsheets, apparently, that tracks their workflow and sort of annotates accounts with some additional information. Often they have sort of their own classification, categorization of accounts and their status. And sometimes they merge those two things together, which can be helpful. So, sort of if you were to break out sort of levels of reporting, I would sort of think of it as a pyramid of the base is the same EHR reports that you can get out of your own system at any time. And if they're just giving you that and reading it back to you, we've got a problem. Something's going to change here. Level 2 is, okay, maybe they're downloading several reports and doing some joins and some pivot tables and some VLOOKUPs, and they're merging some data together that you might not have done without some Excel skills. That's sort of level 2. They are able to summarize things in a way that's more meaningful, and that does add value and sort of drives conversation. It basically subcategorizes things in a way that's more sophisticated. Now, the next level up on that pyramid, I would say, is where they're doing some additional analysis beyond that. So maybe I've merged several reports together and I've grouped them, and now I'm drilling into the things that are wrong, basically. Where are my denials? How many denials, of what flavor? Where did they come from? Those kinds of things. They're basically getting to, I'll call it surface level root cause analysis, which can further drive the conversation. Anybody can do this now. This is very simple. Even if you don't have the Excel skills, or your RCM vendor doesn't have the Excel skills, go to ChatGPT, go to Gemini. You can get an Excel formula that's pretty advanced in a matter of 60 seconds and add that to your spreadsheet. And you can get analysis you wouldn't have thought of before, at least for grouping things based on complex, if and logic, those kinds of things, which is super helpful. And then the final level, the pyramid, which is really, okay, now I've gotten down, I've grouped the things together, I've done some analysis. Now I'm going to go cluster accounts based on sort of proper root cause, which is technically beyond the scope of most folks. It does require some sort of data science clustering analysis to identify patterns and sub-patterns that are more actionable, which is probably out of scope for most RCM companies. That's the kind of thing we do here at Lockbox as part of our software system, but not generally what a normal RCM company could do on their own. So on that pyramid of basic, merge a couple things, do analysis, Francis, if you had to guess, what percentage of time do you think a client's getting which level of reporting from their RCM vendor?
Oh, I rarely see it. I don't typically see the drill down of, let's say, claims denied for timely filing. What's the drill down on that as far as by payer, by provider, to where you can actually get even more into, okay, when you get down to the very core of where these are coming from the most, it is from this location or this provider or with this payer. You won't see it to that degree. But I do want to back up a little bit to talk about the reports themselves before you can analyze what the root cause of things. I always want to tell people to be very careful about even the report generation. You got to understand what is being made up of in those numbers, those totals. So you have to pull back the curtain. I'm amazed by people, providers, board members, at CFOs that don't ask, where are these coming from? One thing for certain is if you were to hold accountable or test the reliability of your data, is to say, I'm going to rerun last December and compare it to if you ran it today. This is where you get into, are they closing the system each month, hard closing, to say that numbers will not be altered historically. That's one test. The other is, yes, again, pulling back the curtains. What parameters are they using? When you get a KPI report that says your collection rate from this RCM vendor is 97.8%, well, you can play with the statistics, right? Did they run that by, what's included in that is that the contractual adjustments are being categorized correctly. The non-contractuals, you can set it by, is it by rendering, by billing? Is it by data service? Are you aging by data service? Are you aging by liability date? You've got to understand each month that it's consistent. And are they including inactive patients, active patients? There's just so many parameters. Understand that first and foremost. What is being run? If you run it yourself and your RCM company sends you their report of that same report, you get different numbers. It's either a parameter setting, chosen, or something else wonky going on. So you've got to do that first. And then, yes, you take that data and now that every month you both agree on what's being put into it. Then you get to the root cause, right? But no, I do not see that coming from RCM companies. They basically tell you, here are the stats. We're doing good. We've collected this much. This is how much you've charged. And, this is your peak season. So things look really great. Those kind of things.
Yeah, you touched on several areas, and you and I talk about this all the time. If you want to manipulate numbers, get in there and make some adjustments. If this is where the devil is in the details, and the smallest detail that people don't pay enough attention to are adjustment types and adjustment rationale, right? So if I want to really hide the mistakes, I'm just going to write everything off to contractual, right? So I can bury a lot in it. You expect contractual to be a big number. Maybe it's bigger than it should be, but do you audit? Do you know? Probably not. You're probably not paying attention to that because it's a level of detail that you don't have time to as a practice. There's a reason you outsourced, but you should be asking the questions. Show me the accounts. Show me how we do contractual adjustments. What does a partial denial look like? When do we do the contractual adjustment? Was it at the time of billing? Was it only at the time of receipt? Are you burying denials essentially? Are you hiding our AR under the guise of adjusted accounts to increase your collection rate? And there's so many honest mistakes that sometimes you may have a set of honest mistakes happening. A lot of that triggers from, for example, automated posting. So auto posting that sometimes works fine. Also, sometimes it does not work fine. And you might end up with, if somebody sends an original payment and then they reverse it and correct it, the reversal and correction don't post at all. So they've of course reversed it and corrected it, usually to pay you less, not to pay you more. So it's kind of an after the fact recoupment / denial that you become blind to. And a lot of this has to do, the systems don't work that well together. There's a lot of EHRs that folks are on that are old and don't process 835 scenarios really well. And of course, the payers are playing lots of tricks, and they have lots of layers of sort of transactional processing. So you'll see if you open up, the paper EOB or the electronic 835 in a more readable format, you will often see things going on that will confuse you. And if as a sort of revenue cycle director, if you're not aware of that or paying attention to that or understand how a strange scenario coming on an 835, like for example, they reverse and correct on a separate check. And so the check amount is wrong. And things happen like that all the time now. And even more, and I would say with the AI systems coming into the adjudication process, there's more of that after the fact, let's change how much we paid, AKA recoupment. Those are not well handled by almost any EHR, and they're not well understood by a lot of staff. They don't know what to do with the additional adjustments. So they might, for example, take that sort of late stage denial and put it all in a contractual adjustment, and you don't know about it. So you need to ask questions. So I think, depending on your level of sophistication as an RCM director, you should have already, and we've talked about this before, gone and sat next to people who do specific work and seen how they do what they do. Maybe you haven't done that yet. Maybe you want to drill in, or maybe you've outsourced that function. Go ask about specific accounts. Proactively probe, because I think one thing that we all know, they're going to present themselves in the best light. The test is, can they answer the tough questions you ask? Do they fumble? Do they get back with you an accurate answer? What have you seen, Francis, in effective communication between sort of RCM director at the client side working with RCM vendors? Sort of, what's the best case scenario here?
Are you saying what's the best case if they were to do it, or have I seen it done? Clarify the question.
Good point, right? They may not always be one or the other. Well, let's take an idealistic scenario. What would you like to see happen?
I would like to see a RCM manager, the one account manager that's been assigned to you, that is going to be the one that communicates with the RCM director every month, say, guess what? So this is a report this month that shows X to be your, collection rate. What that person should be able to say is, by the way, compared this quarter to last quarter, the reason it looks like this is because you did a mass write-off. Like, let's say somebody internally sends a ton of accounts to a collection agency quarterly. There should be an understanding there of when you do what and when we do what, right? So if you write off a bunch of accounts quarterly to bad debt, but you missed doing that one quarter, so you've done it twice in one quarter and none in one, kind of like writing a rent check late one month. So it looks like you paid 2 rents one month and none the other. So it looks like you're rich that one month and then you're really down the other. That's what happens to AR reports if things aren't cyclical and explainable. So that person should be able to say, well, or even ask. Sometimes they don't have the answer, but to be able to communicate questions like, we see that it looks like this month. It makes us look like we really didn't do a good job, but I feel like something happened this past month. Can you explain to me what you may have done on your side? So there needs to be a question and answer exchange, because there isn't always an explanation without asking. I've even had to do that, where I will run a bunch of reports and say, oh my gosh, something doesn't look right, but I need you to tell me what changed. Oh, well, we added a provider and he didn't get credentialed yet, that kind of thing. So that's to me the most important thing, is that there is an exchange of questions and answers, not always just answers.
Yeah. To build on that, a lot of times in the collaborative relationship that you need to have when you've outsourced a section of RCM work, a lot of the upfront work, whether it's verification of benefits and authorization and coding and initial bill submission, some subset of that's probably still happening in the practice level, which means, call it the root cause of a fair amount of denials is happening inside the 4 walls of the client. And one thing that I would like to see that I rarely see because of the sort of power imbalance between the revenue cycle vendor and the client, the revenue cycle vendor is aware of problems and has maybe done some analysis that, oh gosh, this same thing keeps happening. We keep getting denied for, missing prior authorization because the code they authorize is different than the code they build. Things that were out of control of the vendor, but the vendor's now stuck cleaning up and sort of reporting back to you. So a good vendor should, yes, give you some summary, give some analysis, but then ask questions that probe behavior change and awareness back inside in the four walls of on the client side.
Mm-hmm.
It's tricky for a vendor. Some vendors are offshore. That even changes things. The personality types of not wanting to offend and make everybody feel good and get through the meeting. It lends itself to not sort of raising the red flags. And it needs to be a two-way thing. So the RCM vendor should be raising red flags back to the client just as much as the opposite way, the client raising red flags back to the vendor, in order to drive process change. So one of the things that will often happen is because sort of AR and denials are where the sort of fallout of bad process lands. The vendor often has the best insight into what is going on upstream and out of their control, but they don't acknowledge it and say it. So one of the things I'd like to see more of is that sort of, hey, let's ask about this. We've brought up to you 3 months in a row this similar situation with these two payers. It looks like these plans don't cover this service, but probably you're not checking. You're just validating that they have insurance, but not the plan benefits. They need to understand that, or even take the initiative. A great way, one of my favorite things is when you've got a proactive RCM company and you've got somebody who's going to say, we see an issue with this plan. I went ahead and called on these accounts and validated that this plan doesn't include this service, but you're not catching it on the front end and telling the patient that they're going to owe for a certain charge code, a certain service. That proactive investigative nature is a great way to say, I've got bad news, but I also can tell you more to the client. And that level of insight is what, a revenue cycle director is looking for, insights that they can take action on. A good vendor can give them those insights and almost cover up some other, we're slow on doing X and Y, but guess what we found that you can help us with? Those kinds of back and forth collaborative relationship, that changes the game.
Yeah. And John, I'd like to add to that. Nobody's going to care about your revenue flow or your denial rate as much as you. So the RCM director of the organization, a couple of things the tricks that I always teach, and being able to know what questions to ask, because they're not going to think about it, is like if you run an adjustment detail report, or you had some way of analytically knowing that your 100% write-offs are consistently for this particular service, and it's because of no prior auth, there's a pattern, there's a root cause. They are going to look at you like, well, it's not our fault because you all didn't do the prior auth. And we're looking at them like, why didn't you tell us that this is a problem? It's happened at least 12 times a month on a $12,000 surgery, so you need each other. The RCM vendors are very responsive. They will jump on it. If you say, I see a problem that you didn't catch, or that this means a lot to us, but you didn't realize it means a lot to us, they will say, you know what, I'll get someone on that. We'll add that to our scope of work to watch out for that. But it's still on you to say this matters, because I don't think that's in their realm to dig down to root causes. Another example real quick is like patient statements. That's a set it and forget it thing. Nobody's previewing patient statement balances. But if you were to stop and look, gosh, why am I seeing, every month out of our 400 that we send out, well, it's probably more than 400, that, 18% of them are Medicaid patients. Why are Medicaid patients getting a bill? Well, that's a question for your RCM vendor. Why are these Medicaid patients, they don't even look like it's processed? Why is it in my statement cycle? And that's where the two worlds don't always come together and speak the same language because it's fragmented, right? You're doing the patient side, we're doing the Medicaid billing. Somebody is not communicating. So those are good things, little tricks to watch yourself and push back to them.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing that I've seen come up too is when there's a skeleton crew in the client side, and we all know it's very difficult to hire right now and retain good people, and you're almost always understaffed. But then the vendor does find a problem that is going to cost you as the client more work. Maybe it's for these groups of payers, we have to do these 7 extra things now because now they're replacement plans instead of traditional Medicare plans or whatever it is. And it's technically not in the scope of work of the RCM vendor, and it is going to take bodies and time. And usually they're not overstaffing, and oftentimes they're compensated on a percent of collections. So if doing these extra 7 steps, yes, in theory, it will improve collections because instead of getting a denial, I'll get it paid the first time. But there's going to be some hemming and hawing about who's supposed to be responsible for this. One tactic that a rev cycle director can easily pull, especially if you're working sort of a hybrid with a hybrid vendor who's part onshore, part offshore, where offshore resources may be a little bit more affordable, you can just say, hey, I would just want to hire someone full-time or fractionally, independent of our cost of collection work, to take care of this other chunk of work that we now have to be responsible for. So it may only cost you another $800 a month, and you can solve this problem that's actually going to return 20 grand a month. And it means that it may have been something that's not in the traditional scope of work of the RCM vendor, but they will happily staff for it. And if you can do that, you can plug holes in ways that are a little bit more creative, and you can augment your current staffing model that you have with your revenue cycle director or with your revenue cycle vendor with sort of staff resources that are billed differently. You don't want to change. Maybe you got a good 4.5% rate, whatever it might be. You're not going to want to change that to 5% to cover this extra person. You just want to have a person doing a job all the time or half the time, whatever it is. You can hire that way. And most RCM vendors are happy to do that to satisfy the client and make you not churn, make you happy. They're sort of going to bill for something. They're going to add some margin in there. It's okay. But that strategy of being sort of flexible, almost as beyond the sort of MSA that you may have with the vendor, you can plug holes in more creative ways than you're probably thinking about. So I just want, what kind of creative ways have you seen just to, I've seen the percent of charge or percent of collection, FTE model, those kinds of things. What do you see being a preference of vendors right now or clients you worked with when outsourcing? Do you see a preference one way or another?
They typically, it is a percentage of collections, right? It's more about the carve outs. I have not seen anybody deviate from the percentage of collections very much. There might be, if there's a pre-collection service built in to where they'll handle patient AR, there might be a flat fee by the volume, but percentage wise, so they're looking to what's included and excluded in that percentage. Is it patient co-pays? People have argued, right, with whether that should be included or excluded because I collected that. You didn't do anything towards collecting the copay. Why should you get 5% of that? So it's really about the negotiation on what's carved out of that amount. You certainly don't want a check that you get in for from a lawyer for doing medical records review or a research check you get every month. I've seen those in different offices where it gets lumped in, or actually a collection agency check that you get every month. And they post that one check. They didn't do anything to get it, but they're getting a percentage of a pretty large sum if you've turned over a large amount and they've recovered it. So those are the things you really want to make sure you include, exclude, and, get paid for the effort. So, and that's all about that too. The reason why the RCM vendors do care is because anything you spotlight to them that will bring in more money for you, it brings in for them. So they're willing to do it. It is all about communicating it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. So it's all about helping the RCM director coordinate and collaborate in a two-way conversation with analysis and insight delivery, in helping, even coaching your outsourced vendor to go do some things differently, set some new expectations. Maybe you've acquired a relationship that's been in place for years. It's not going great. It could be going better. You can still coach them up and help them help you as a revenue cycle director by asking them to go do things maybe they hadn't done before, which is tell me what we're doing that could help everybody. Um, find me things, bring me something new. Each month we're going to meet. Don't just read me the reports. Give me some better data. Give me some analysis, and tell me something I could do to help all of us. And they're going to be receptive to having that more collaborative and less sort of traditional factory approach. They're going to be excited about that, because it should be a good, strong relationship, and that should build. Even if you never see the people at all, you should respect what they bring to the table. And so anyway, I'm really excited to have talked about this. I think, revenue cycle outsourcing, of course, is the most common way these days. It's over 50% of all revenue cycle is outsourced in a variety of delivery models, but it's not always working well. And so we're all about helping the relationship work better. Francis, any parting words for a revenue cycle director that's a year into the job, that sort of wants to make a mark? What could they do tomorrow that would help them sort of get some more results?
Well, they should basically get in touch with that account manager and say, look, this is how we've been doing things. I would like to take it up a step, and let's talk about how we can meet more regularly, or meet with this new set of question and answers. And I'd like to bring on a team lead from our front office to kind of talk about what can they do better to help you have cleaner claims for us, that kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much. This has been another episode of RCM Tech Talk. John Williamson and Francis Burton signing off. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.